What's up, guys? Thank you so much for checking out the video. As you could tell from the intro cinematic, I went out and took some photos. And the purpose of that was, well, for my own enjoyment as well, but was for this video. This is going to be an educational video. And yeah, the main thing is going to be, we're going to go over what I consider to be the three main tips that have really helped me with photography. But also tips that for beginner photographers or anybody just interested in photography, they can take these tips and apply them to their own images. And the big idea is going to be, with these three tips, to help your images become less boring. I feel that's one thing that every photographer struggles with at one point, is just seeing their pictures, like it's missing something. So I think the tips that I'll go over in this video will really help you out. So let me just start recording my screen here. I already went ahead and edited all the images up. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, and I think the most important thing for any photographer, is composition. I think composition, I have to use kind of an analogy I was thinking of yesterday. It's like a composer for an orchestra. Like the role of a composer is to make sure that everything in the band, or everyone that he wants in the band playing, is playing. And composition is, I would say, the same thing for photography. It's the photographer making sure that everything in the photo is exactly how they want it, and nothing's missing and nothing's even added. So you don't want, you're composing the image exactly the way you want to. And I think the biggest rule for composition would be the rule of thirds. I think even if you're not a photographer, you've probably heard of this composition technique. And as you can see on my screen right here, I have an image that I think demonstrates the rule of thirds very well. If you're not too blown away by this image, it's going to come in later and kind of show you how we can make it even better. But I think rule of thirds is such a good composition tool because it encompasses a few main things with photography. So the first thing I'll talk about is balance. I think rule of thirds really balances out an image. So I'll draw some lines on the screen, or I'll try and figure, I don't know how to do that, but if lines pop up on the screen, I figured out how to do it. But we'll use the mouse. So you can kind of see rule of thirds as you divide the image up into chunks. So three kind of pillars. So you go here, and then about here, and then here, and here. So it just divides the image up into, what would that be, like nine squares. And the goal with rule of thirds is to align chunks of your image up with those intersection points. So for anybody that's interested in landscape photography, rule of thirds is great for creating a balanced landscape. So for this image, we can see that the horizon line, or the floor of the forest here, is right around that bottom third. And you can kind of see right where the sky starts to peek out here, that's right around that top third. So right there, boom, we got a pretty balanced image there. And then another thing with the rule of thirds, not really intentionally, but you know, it's pretty much lined up with these trees. So this is pretty much like a cookie cutter example of the rule of thirds, but it really shows what a balanced image looks like. So let's say if I was to crop this image and kind of show you, you already tell I was on a bit of a slant here, but if I squished it down like this and had it like this, let's say. So right away, at least for me, something just looks off in this image. You can see the tree line right here is quite low, and you're cutting out a lot of the foreground. It's nice for that bottom third of the rule of thirds to be your full foreground. So it just feels a little bit congested up here, and there's a lot of room up here. So that's just an idea to show you what it looks like when done incorrectly. Another thing with composition, other than the rule of thirds, would be framing. So before I leave rule of thirds, we're gonna go to this image here. I actually really like this picture. So rule of thirds isn't just, like, for sure it's for balancing your image, to kind of have your foreground and your sky and kind of your subject in the middle. But again, if we have these lines, these imaginary lines that kind of run here, 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 here. So in an image like this, where there's no foreground, no sky, nothing to kind of cookie cutter match, like that bottom line is so easy to match with the top, like your horizon line. But when you don't have a horizon line, it can be a bit interesting, because that's where these intersection points come in. So this camera, you can kind of see if there was an imaginary line right here, it lines up right with the camera. So the rule of thirds is great, not only for balancing an image, but for placing the subject of your image. For sure, there's nothing wrong here. If we go to this image here, images can still look good if you put it smack dab in the middle, as with this image. I think it's pretty clean picture. So it's not always the hard cut rule of thirds. And we're not going to go into all the composition techniques, but there's tons of them. So smack dab in the middle is one as well. But we're going to stick to just rule of thirds for this one. So yeah, it just shows you it's not only for matching up the horizon line, but you can just put your subject right on one of those intersections. And that just gives it a balanced overall look. And one tip I will say, if you're doing that, if you're balancing up with one of these lines, it's nice to have your subject facing in the opposite direction. So if I had the camera here and I had the lens kind of angled out this way, it would feel very congested. My Google Home's beeping right now. No, it's good. So it's the same with the person. If I had a person here and they were looking off to the screen, it kind of makes your mind think, what are they looking at? There's nothing over there because it's the end of the image. But we have the subject facing towards the rest of the picture. It kind of leads your eye, boom, they're looking this way, and then you kind of look at the rest of the image. The goal of composition is to kind of guide your eye through the image. So having your subject balanced appropriately on one of those rule of thirds makes it super easy. Yeah, I think that's all I really want to talk about for rule of thirds. I want to now talk about framing. Where's my framing picture? Boom. So framing is a really, I think, not necessarily an easy composition technique. I think framing takes some practice to really figure out. But this image is another one. My camera was, that's the thing. When you don't, I was out taking photos of myself. Didn't have a whole lot of things to take photos of. So I either took photos of myself or of my camera in my camera bag. But this photo, not really using the rule of thirds for the subject because it's just smack dab in the middle. But for framing, it really draws your eye into it. So I kind of framed it with these ferns here. So we got these ferns wrapping around this side, and I kind of manhandled this fern to make it kind of counteract this empty space over here. And if you want to be really sharp about it, you could even say, I'm kind of using the rule of thirds for this fern here. But it's not a subject, so we got it blown out of focus. So we got the focus here, but that's kind of a sub point. That kind of is on the rule. It's on one of those thirds line. But framing is a really good technique. I will say it's a bit more complicated than the rule of thirds. Rule of thirds, you can even turn the grids on your camera and kind of line things up. Framing, and this is the reason I like framing, it involves more creativity. You look for things in the environment to frame your image with. If you have a subject, actually, I'll save that for later. My next point, I'll kind of go over framing a person. And it can be really fun, and you'll notice, especially when you frame somebody with these out of focus elements, it really draws your eye into the subject. But yeah, framing, I think I like it more than the rule of thirds. I think rule of thirds is a great starting spot for composition. But once you master that, there's tons of room to grow. And framing, I think, is a very creative way to compose an image. Yeah, so I think that's all I want to talk about for composition. The second thing I want to talk about, and I have a little hint for this second one, is subject. Subject is, composition, as I've already said, was the most important thing to counteract a boring image. But subject, ooh man, they might be tied. But let's find the idea for subject. Oh, here we go. So we're going back to this image. My rule of, actually I want to uncrop this one. Oh shoot. I ruined this picture. Yeah, something, I think it was kind of like that. Okay, so as I said right from the start, this image, we're obeying the rule of thirds, so there you go. It's a balanced image, I'll give it that. But when you look at a picture like this, it's what I would describe as a boring picture. Your eye's not really sure where to look in this image. You say, yeah, there's nice mossy trees, nothing's blown out, nice little trail going right down the middle. Like, it's a pleasant picture. But I'd say what this picture is missing is a subject. And so we'll go over here, boom, and all of a sudden, I think a boring image is an image where you look at and you don't know where to look. And I think that's a key sign that either your picture has no subject or the subject isn't clear. Your eye is not sure what the subject of the picture is. So my hint, and this is like, I would say the biggest hint, or the thing that helped, it's such a crutch for photography, is put a person in your image. And if you don't have a person, take a picture of yourself, get a tripod. But I think it's just that human element. As soon as you see a person in a picture, your eye immediately knows where to look. And I think that's so evident by, you go through all those YouTube thumbnails where the guy's like, it's just like a close-up of their face. And the reason they do that is because when we see a human, it's like, boom, we recognize it. We react to it. So it's something a bit more artistic than a YouTube thumbnail. Photographs, you can abuse that as well. Immediately when I look at this picture, my eye knows exactly where to look. Whereas this photo looked empty, there was not really anything to look at. Boom, you put a person smack dab in the middle, and your eye knows exactly where to look. I wouldn't say this is a crazy image, but it's definitely more interesting than your classic landscape shot. And if you like landscape photography, there's nothing wrong with that. I do find landscape photography can be a bit trickier to make interesting unless, like, the world is full of crazy places. And if you're able to go to crazy places, you can get some wild landscape shots. But it is harder to find interesting landscapes. I think it's much easier to create an interesting image by putting an interesting subject in potentially a not boring landscape, but not a waterfall, not a mountain range. You know, if you can find places like that, it's so easy to take interesting photos. But if you're just in a simple forest or on a beach, throw a person in there. Not that a beach or a forest is boring, but a human will make it pop that much more. It adds to the environment, doesn't take away. So yeah, I think a subject is the biggest thing. Let's see if I have another example of a subject in here. Oh, yes, I do. Where's the other picture? Oh, here we go. So, although my hint was a human subject is a bit of a cheat code, there's lots of ways to find subjects that aren't human, and they can be just as interesting. I wouldn't say this is as interesting, but if you look at this picture, I would describe it very similar to the last one of the path running down the woods there. So I look at this. There's nothing wrong with it, but my eye's not really too sure where to look. It's a little boring. There's some dynamic stuff going on here. We've got the light over here, the dark. Bonus tip for your composition, triangles are pretty popular. Not popular, I guess, but triangles look good. So we kind of got this line going right down the middle. So we got a triangle here, a triangle there. Nothing crazy. If I was to see this picture, I'd probably swipe right over it. But as soon as you add this fern in the middle, I feel like this fern adds a lot to the image. I did put a little extra time editing into this. But again, you still keep the dark and the light triangles, but the triangle composition is even added more to by the subject. When your subject can add to your composition, it really benefits. So yeah, not too much to say about this. I just think it's a much more interesting image. As soon as I see, like with this image, I look at it, it's like, oh, it's some grass. But with this image, you almost notice the grass after the fact that you look at the fern. And that's what you want in a picture. You want your eye to be immediately drawn to the subject. I messed around with this. I like this bark as well. I mean, I'm not sure if that takes away from it, but the fern's the main thing here. One thing I'm gonna add. This picture works for the last 2 points. So composition as well as subject. So this image plays into the fact that there is a subject. We got this big tree smack dab in the middle. Got the ferns. And now this image isn't edited, so it's not too crazy. So basically I'm saying a subject doesn't necessarily mean that the photo's interesting. However, we go over to this image, again, edited, so it looks nicer, of course. But all of a sudden, when you combine those two things, composition and subject, you get an image that really, really pops out, becomes very interesting. When the composition leads you towards the subject, that's when you have an interesting image. So in here, you see over in this image, there's the subject, but nothing really draws your eye into it. With this image, we use what I was talking about in the composition of framing. So framing, we drop the camera down. We kind of got a little bit of this foreground, a little bit, some of it's blurred out. We got the nice little bit of a bokeh going on there. And then also, I kind of had some of these ferns come over top of me as well. And that really kind of blocks out the top, blocks out the bottom, and what you're left with is the subject smack dab in the middle. So yeah, it's just a way that you can use both those techniques to really make an image pop. Yeah, I'm trying, is there any other, yeah, some of these, this is another image. This is rule of thirds. So, you got this shoe right here. And that's kind of it. This one's not really on it, but this one kind of on this third here. Again, and the shoe's pretty much the subject. So we kind of got this blurred out foreground. But yeah, again, image not really too much to write home about. So subject, I'd say, oh, here, actually I want to show you this photo. I want to show you this one. This is probably my favorite photo of the whole day. And oh my gosh, I got to show you the the work up to this photo. It was a struggle to climb up on this stump here. Where is it? This thing, it had rained the day before, so it was so slippery. So you can kind of see, I'm like, how the frick? Yeah, you can kind of see a little bit of a smirk there too. I'm like, bruh, how am I supposed to get up this thing? But that was the original image. But anyways, let's go back. Needless to say, it was hard to climb up there, so. But I think the picture was worth it. It turned out being pretty epic. But similar to that tree photo I just went over, I think in this photo, subject as well as composition work together to create a dynamic image. So obviously we have me as the subject, and the composition we actually got a lot of stuff going on here. I think that's when you see the best image, is when you apply all these steps together: composition, subject, and then the last one I'll talk about. But when you apply multiple forms of composition, that's when you really see our image pop. So we got the rule of thirds going on here. We got this bottom third, sorry, and then the top third, me right in the middle. We also, not only rule of thirds, we got a bit of framing going on here. So we got these blurred out ferns, kind of drawing your eye away from this stump, which we're not here for the stump. We're here for that booty. So we got me smack dab in the middle. We're also doing a little bit of framing of me with these two trees. We got this tree on this side, which really, we got a bit of a tree sticking out the top of my head, but that's okay. We got me smack dab in the middle here. So this image, I think, is the perfect example of an interesting image. And in order for us to make it interesting, we combined multiple composition techniques, a clear subject, and then the last tip, which I'll talk about. But to get an image like this, it does take a little bit of practice. To see something and to know what you want to go for takes time. So even though these tips are good tips for beginners, the number one way to improve with photography is practice. So go out there, practice. I do think guided practice is better than blind practice, although you can learn from blind practice as well. But with these tips, as you're practicing, at least they'll give you something to know what to practice. You might save a little bit of time. But the last tip I'm going to go over is kind of an unfortunate one, but I really think it's a necessary one. I know when I first started photography, I'd look at other photographers' Instagram accounts and be like, oh my gosh, like what kind of camera do they have? The images they're getting, like the colors are crazy, the focus, the bokeh, like it's just wild. And it took me a little while to realize it's not really about what camera you have. It's about the image, obviously the two previous steps we talked about, but it's also about editing. To get certain colors, you have to edit them to make them that way. To get certain not depths of field, but to draw your eyes into the subject, it's all about editing. So we'll go back to this image here. You know what? I'll show you the before. So boom, that's what it looked like before. Still a good image. Editing, colors and everything with editing, you can't make a bad image good. But you can enhance an image to make it even better. I think editing is the cherry on top that everybody that's serious about photography needs to get some kind of program. I use Lightroom. I'm not sure. I bet you there's some kind of free version. Even honestly, Instagram, the editor's not too bad, but by no comparison to Lightroom. But it's just the difference that editing makes is crazy. And editing can really, it's the cherry on top, I'd say, to make an image that much more interesting. And the one thing I will talk, I'm not going to go over like how I do all my editing, but the big thing I want to talk about, because we're talking about making an image interesting, is you can really manipulate editing to draw your eye into the subject. And the best way to do that is with these graduated, what are these called? Linear gradients. So if we delete this, when I look at this picture now, I find that the ferns are taking up more of my attention than I'd want them to, is the best way. Obviously, I'm looking at myself, but the ferns are bothering me. So the best way that I do it when I edit is I'll use these linear gradients. You just draw it up, boop, 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 right about there. And you just bring the exposure right down. And boom, all of a sudden, you're not even thinking about the ferns. They're still there, they're still adding to the photo, but the attention isn't being drawn. They're what you notice after you're looking at the subject is what we want. We don't want anything drawing our eye away from the subject. So, yeah. So editing, I'm not sure if it's gonna be, Lightroom or whatever program you wanna use, but I think editing is necessary for creating interesting images. But yeah, I think that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I think next time I do one of these educational videos, I might write a bit more of a script or go exactly what I want to go over. I've never really taught anybody photography before, so it's kind of interesting going over. I've never gone over my process really. But if you like this video and you want to see more, if you want to know how I edit or something like that, just let me know. Yeah, I got a 15-day vacation coming up, so I'm hoping to crank out lots of videos, like cinematic. I want to do some storytelling as well. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, and yeah, catch you in the next one. Thanks, bye.